Greetings, welcome to episode 6 of Yeresiesie and the Preparation for Reparations podcast, discussing from critique to action, building people's power at the Bristol Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings. Welcome to the 6th episode of Yeresiesie and I'm your host, Esther Xosei, joined once again by my co-host, Brother Simeon. But let us first pour some libation. We pour libation to the Creator of the heavens and the earth, and to our ancestors and ancestresses whose resistance has laid the foundation for our continued struggle. We pour for the warrior spirits of our African heritage communities in Bristol, who have helped to push forward reparations demands in that city, and to all of our warrior spirits who have joined with them. To the ancestors and ancestresses whose wisdom guides us in building people's power rather than relying on institutional promises. May our words honour their sacrifices. May our deeds advance their and our struggle. Ashe. Ashe. Asheo.
Greetings, family. In our last episode, Whose Justice? Interrogating Power in Global Reparations Movements, we critically examined recent developments in the global reparations landscape, from the Ghana Summit to the African Union's theme on justice through reparations.
Yes, and the thread connecting our critiques, our constructive critiques, was clear. Genuine reparatory justice requires more than declarations, conferences, or state-led initiatives. It demands building real community power from the ground up with our Indigenous African and grassroots community voices at the centre.
Today, we move the critique to action and we focus on powerful grassroots narratives happening right here within the UK. The upcoming Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings, also referred to as PARRG, are taking place in Bristol this month or next on May the 17th.
Yes, the PARRG represents everything we've been advocating for. Not waiting for institutions to grant us a seat at their table, but building our own table, defining our own agendas, and organising our communities to assert our right to shape reparations processes.
Yes, we'll be exploring how this Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings embodies the principle that true participation for reparations isn't about waiting for governments or international bodies to act. It's about the work we do ourselves. Yeresiesie yen we preparing ourselves. Connecting last episode's critiques to community action. Auntie Esther, in our last episode, we critically examined several high-profile reparations developments that, despite their promising rhetoric, often exclude everyday people from meaningful participation. How does the Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings in Bristol directly address these shortcomings?
That's precisely the right question, Brother Simeon. What makes the PARRG so significant is that it represents the antithesis of the top-down approaches that we've critiqued. The PARRG is titled Nothing About Us Without Us, asserting our right to shape reparations processes through our own people's power building. This directly challenges the somewhat elitist practices that we have identified in many of the summits and conferences and UN forums that we discussed.
And I recall in episode 2, we did a deep dive into Maatzoedzaduaras as a foundational element in building grassroots power for reparatory justice. How does this relate to the upcoming PARRG in Bristol?
You're making an excellent connection, Brother Simeon. The Bristol PARRG represents the next level in our grassroots power building framework that we outlined in episode 2 of our podcast. If you can recall, we explained how Maatzoedzaduaras, our Ma'at Action Learning Circles, form the foundation of our reparations infrastructure that we are proposing people also embrace. These family and community-based circles document our experiences of the Maangamizi and develop healing practices from the ground up.
Yes, and you explained that these circles connect to broader structures like PARRGs, which is exactly what the Bristol event represents.
Exactly. As we discussed in episode 2, Maatzoedzaduaras aren't isolated initiatives. They link directly to the Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings, or the PARRGs, which in turn connect to people's assemblies on African reparations. This is the pathway through which grassroots knowledge and power flow upwards to shape institutional processes such as the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice that the Stop the Maangamizi campaign has been advocating for, rather than the other way around.
Okay, so this connects directly to our critique of the African Union and other state framework, where you said it's not about documents, declarations, or diplomatic performances. Rather, it's about implementation and actual redistribution of power.
Precisely. The PARRG doesn't just talk about power redistribution, it embodies it through participatory structures. For example, the event in Bristol taking place on the 17th of May, which I have to say is going to be taking place at the Malcolm X Centre, includes a specific segment on participatory rights in reparations, which explores how participation in defining reparations and shaping reparations processes and outcomes is itself a form of power reclamation. It demonstrates how community control over the reparations narrative in itself builds political power.
Well, I'm particularly interested in how the PARRGs connect local struggles to the global frameworks we discussed. For instance, we talked about the erasure of women's intellectual contributions in Pan-African spaces and the marginalization of indigenous African and grassroots perspectives.
The PARRG addresses this through its Groundings methodology, which values every participant's lived experience as a source of knowledge and truth. There's a specific story circle where participants share personal experiences or family experiences, collective and community experiences of the Maangamizi across areas like educational discrimination, economic exclusion, cultural appropriation, health disparities, and criminal justice experiences.
So it's creating space for precisely the voices that are often excluded from institutional forums.
Yes. And crucially, it doesn't just collect these experiences or recycle them. It transforms them into organized power through the Maatzoedzaduaras, which are action learning circles for documenting the Maangamizi and practicing liberation and repair. This systematic documentation creates an alternative power base that challenges official narratives that are often universalized and strengthens community negotiating power in our reparations demands and processes and initiatives.
This sounds like a direct challenge to state-centered approaches we've critiqued, where declarations often substitute implementation.
That's exactly right. And remember our discussion of the healing frameworks that dominated spaces like the Accra Summit in Ghana. The PARRG approaches healing not as an abstract process accessible only to privileged participants or those who get selected, but as something embedded in community power building. Healing comes through reclaiming our right to shape our own liberation. And it's not just about being critical of state-led initiatives. That critique only comes in because most of the time they exclude many of the voices in their citizenries that really should be relied on and called upon and amplified in actually defining not only the meaning of repair, but the processes of repair.
The Bristol context, from motion to movement. Let's talk about the significance of Bristol as the location for this park. This isn't random, is it?
No, not at all. Bristol holds tremendous significance in our reparations struggle. And we've been working with community activists based in Bristol now for quite a while, certainly since the early 2000s, in particular people like Sister Jendai, Brother Madhu and many others currently organising in African Connections Consortium, which they both co-facilitate. And Bristol became the site of a pivotal moment in our people's struggle when protesters toppled the statue of enslaver Edward Colston during a Black Lives Matter demonstration.
And this just isn't about symbolic actions alone, correct? There have been some concrete political developments as well.
Absolutely. Following decades of grassroots organising and the momentum that has been generated by these events, and I have to say our own working and organising in Bristol via the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, working in partnership with formations like the African Connections Consortium since 2015, we managed to secure in 2021 the securing of the groundbreaking Atonement and Reparations Motion passed by Bristol City Council on the 2nd of March 2021. Now this motion, which was actually co-authored by the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, initially when it was first passed in Islington and Lambeth boroughs in London, it explicitly acknowledged the city's role, that is the city of Bristol's role, in the enslavement of African people and committed to supporting reparations initiatives. Now, a huge amount of work was done by not only us in the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, but we worked in partnership with Green Party elected officials. Firstly, Scott Ainsley, who was a former MEP for the Green Party in Lambeth and is now a councillor, and also Councillor Cleo Lake, who at one time was the mayor of Bristol too, as well as working in partnership with formations such as African Connections Consortium and others.
So Bristol represents a case study in how organised community power can achieve concrete political victories.
Exactly. And that's why the Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings specifically includes an in-depth exploration of the Bristol Atonement and Reparations Motion as a step towards establishing the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice, otherwise referred to as the APSITARJ, which our very own Stop the Maangamizi campaign has been advocating for.
Can you explain to our listeners then how the motion emerged from grassroots organising?
Yes, the motion didn't arise in a vacuum. It was the result of decades of strategic power building through grassroots African liberation organising. African heritage communities within and beyond Bristol developed organised power that institutions could no longer ignore. The motion includes key provisions that establish mechanisms for continued community participation and leadership of African heritage communities in reparations processes and reparations planning within the city of Bristol that centre our needs, our perspectives and our experiences, ensuring that this passing of the motion isn't just a one-off symbolic gesture.
And am I right to say that this directly connects to what you've been advocating for in the Stop the Maangamizi campaign?
Correct. It does. The Bristol Atonement and Reparations Motion serves as a compelling local example of what we've been pushing for nationally and internationally through the proposal for the Maatzoedzaduaras. It demonstrates how local victories can build momentum towards national, international and transnational change. That's why the PARRG includes a specific discussion on how communities employ strategies to build momentum towards establishing the Maatzoedzaduaras as a tool for effecting Pan-African liberation.
So, the Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings in Bristol, or using Bristol's success story, is something that will inspire and inform similar efforts elsewhere.
Precisely. The PARRG provides a space for community members to learn from Bristol's experience and adapt these strategies to their own local or global context. There's a specific groundings element exploring questions like what institutional pressure points exist in your own local area that can be targeted for similar victories, and what lessons from the local Bristol campaigning efforts can strengthen lobbying efforts for reparations elsewhere. I need to emphasise that even though this PARRG is taking place in Bristol, it is not just for Bristol-based African heritage communities. It is a national convening taking place in Bristol. So we welcome and invite the participation of community members from wherever they currently reside.
Oh, and this reminds me of our last discussion in the last episode, funny enough, about the disconnection between diplomatic efforts and grassroots movements. The PARRG seems designed to bridge that gap.
That's exactly right. The PARRG creates connections between local or global organising efforts, national and international campaigns, like the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, as well as international framework. It's demonstrating in practice what we've emphasised in our last episode, that is, effective reparations work happens at all these levels simultaneously, and they must be rooted in community power.
Maatzoedzaduaras, Building Knowledge Power. In episode 2, we provided a comprehensive explanation of Maatzoedzaduaras as an action learning circle. Since many listeners may not have heard that episode, could you revisit the concept briefly and explain how the Bristol PARRG builds on this foundation?
Of course. For those who haven't listened to episode 2 of the Yeresiesie Preparation for Reparations podcast, which specifically focuses on Maatzoedzaduaras, we encourage you to go back and hear the detailed discussion. However, I'll try and provide a brief overview. Maatzoedzaduaras are Ma'at action learning circles where families and community members document their experiences of the Maangamizi, their resistance to it, develop healing practices and create practical solutions to redress the Maangamizi. So they are really truth-telling, grassroots truth-telling circles. So the Maatzoedzaduaras, which really are these Ma'at action learning circles that are grassroots truth-telling circles where we learn Ma'at. And that is the ancient Kemetic principle of truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, propriety, and reciprocity.
And these circles form the foundation of our reparations infrastructure, correct?
Exactly. In episode 2, we explained that Maatzoedzaduaras serve as strategic power building spaces that generate the evidence base for our demands. They're also where our communities become the primary definers of harm, the articulators of needs, and the architects of the reparatory justice solutions that we wish to see.
What I find particularly powerful about the Maatzoedzaduaras concept in itself is how it centers grassroots truth-telling. Could you elaborate on why this approach is so fundamental to effective reparations work?
Yeah, that's a crucial point, Brother Simeon. The Maatzoedzaduaras represent a radical departure from conventional truth-telling models that are typically state-led, top-down, and often serve more as performance than transformation. These are grassroots truth-telling spaces deeply rooted in our ancient African principles of Ma'at, so that we must be the reparatory change that we wish to see, which is that self-repair component that is so critical to overstanding and realizing holistic reparations.
So this isn't just about documenting harm then, but actively building new social relationships.
Exactly. The Maatzoedzaduaras are powerful mechanisms for engaging our people from below. They create spaces where communities themselves, not external so-called experts or state representatives, document harms, determine appropriate levels and forms of repair, and actively build new social relations based on the principles of Ma'at.
So why is it that this grassroots truth-telling approach is so essential compared to institutional approaches we've seen?
Historical harms aren't just documented in academic books or through research studies or acknowledged in state declarations. They live in our personal, family, and community memory, in our bodies, in our relationship to land, in disrupted knowledge systems. Conventional truth-telling models often extract these stories or testimonies without actually transforming conditions. The Maatzoedzaduaras are designed explicitly as Ma'at building spaces where truth-telling directly feeds into creating new systems of governance and relationship.
And how does this connect to our critique of state-centered approaches that we discussed in our previous episode?
The Maatzoedzaduaras operate completely outside of state jurisdiction. They don't seek validation from governments or international bodies. Instead, they draw authority from ancestral systems of governance and relationship, intergenerational relationship that predate colonial states and their neo-colonial contemporaries. This allows communities to completely bypass the very institutions that often are continuing or helping to maintain the perpetuation of harm while building autonomous capacity for our own community self-determined repair.
And I imagine these spaces also challenge the commodification of healing that we critiqued when discussing some of the international conferences?
Absolutely. The Maatzoedzaduaras aren't luxury resorts where representatives, elites from amongst us, or those most privileged can gather to discuss healing. They're accessible community spaces where healing is integrated with material repair and socio-political transformation. They reject the false separation between emotional, spiritual, and material dimensions of repair. And they're not just for community leaders or reparations leaders or Pan-African leaders, which is often who gets to go to many of these conferences, right? So there's something that we can all do. We can all start a Maatzoedzaduara with where we're at, with the one or two family members that are interested in going along this journey with us, or community members.
And does the Pan-African Reparations Rebellion Groundings in Bristol build on this foundation?
Absolutely, yes. The PARRG is the next level in our framework. When we link the Maatzoedzaduaras together, so here, let's just say somebody in Bristol, a family in Bristol linking with a family in Manchester, with one in Birmingham, etc., and London, we create networks that allow communities to share knowledge, share their experiences, and also build collective power. The PARRG therefore serves as that connecting point, bringing together the knowledge and power developed in various Maatzoedzaduaras to coordinate broader tactical and strategic action.
Now, I recall in episode 2, you outlined specific steps for setting up a Maatzoedzaduara. Will the Bristol PARRG help people implement those steps?
Absolutely. The Bristol PARRG includes a dedicated segment that will reintroduce the concept of the Maatzoedzaduaras and provide practical guidance on establishing them. As we outlined in episode 2 of our Yeresiesie Preparation for Reparations podcast, this involves, firstly, gathering your circle, creating a meeting structure, documenting our stories, connecting our personal journeys to structural analysis, developing healing or transformative practices, building strategic action, and connecting with other circles.
And can you explain how these grassroots truth commissions actually function in practice?
Well, they're not really truth commissions. They're Ma'at action learning practice circles, but they're kind of grassroots spaces for truth telling rather than a truth commission itself. That is more aligned with the notion of the all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice, which is at a higher level. And we won't be able to secure unless we're able to sensitize, mobilize, organize, and conscientize the masses of our people who can also be making demands for it. So they begin with community-defined protocols for ethical memory work, ensuring that testimony doesn't re-traumatize our community members. They center our own Indigenous African knowledge systems and kind of community grassroots knowledges and documentation methods, rather than imposing external, top-down, often academic frameworks that don't center our African heritage communities' epistemologies. And crucially, they immediately connect truth to action, using testimony to inform community reparations demands and reparations planning that we call Pempamzi and Pango planning, while simultaneously building new governance structures based on the principles of Ma'at.
So these Maatzoedzaduaras are actual Ma'at building spaces. Could you elaborate on what that means?
Yeah, okay. So Ma'at building means actively creating the socio-political, economic, cultural, spiritual relationships that embody Ma'at, that truth, that balance, that harmony, that justice, that reciprocity. It's not just about healing past or continuing wounds. It's about constructing new ways of being, of seeing, of imagining, of dreaming, of relating to each other and to the institutions that we build. The Maatzoedzaduaras are spaces where we practice these relationships while documenting and addressing the historical injustices that we've faced and the ongoing harms.
Now this sounds like a very powerful model that addresses many contradictions we've discussed in previous episodes.
Which is precisely why it's largely absent from many of the, state and foundation funded, supported reparations initiatives, because it's about power to the people. It's about reparations by our own people's power. The Maatzoedzaduaras represent a fundamental challenge to colonial knowledge systems and top-down elitist governance structures. They demonstrate that meaningful repair doesn't require state permission or validation or even funding. Communities already possess the authority, the wisdom, the skills, the capacities, and indeed the resources to enact repair when we organise from a place of our ancestral knowledge and our collective power, and we harmonise our perspectives and we share the resources that we have.
So the PARRG will demonstrate how these action learning circles contribute to broader movement building.
Yes, the PARRGs, that is the Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings, will showcase how the grassroots documentation and knowledge produced in Maatzoedzaduaras inform our collective demands and strategy building for repair. This ensures the substantive rather than the merely descriptive representation in reparations processes, whereby, for instance, we have people that look like us or speak like us or come from the same place or country that our people, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, whoever came from, to actually being people who embrace their Africaneity. Despite the fact that our Africaneity is diverse in how we have evolved it and shaped it and our culture. It's not enough to just have people who look like us in decision-making positions. We need processes that truly reflect our community's knowledges, our experiences, our aspirations, and our own liberation goals.
Oh, so does that mean that participants of the Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings will leave with concrete tools they can implement around this approach?
Yes. The PARRGs are designed to provide practical resources, including handouts on starting the Maatzoedzaduaras. We have our own Stop the Maangamizi campaign template letters for MPs and elected officials, power mapping templates for identifying local pressure or global pressure points, and contact information for mentorship and support. The Stop the Maangamizi campaign and indeed the Maangamizi Educational Trust is offering itself to provide the different types of support that are required to support community members in developing these processes and strengthening them. So these aren't just theoretical concepts, they're practical tools for building our people's power through grassroots telling and Ma'at building.
Oh, so does that mean rather than seeing reparations as something granted by states, this approach positions repair as something community-led and that we can actively create?
Yes, exactly. And that's why we invite our listeners to consider how you might establish Maatzoedzaduaras in your own communities, creating spaces where this radical truth-telling and Ma'at building practice leads directly to strengthening our own community power, where our ancestral wisdom guides contemporary action, and where repair becomes not a distant demand, but an immediate practice of creating new relationships and systems grounded in justice.
The reparations power building pathway. Let's talk about how the PARRG fits into a broader strategy for building reparations power. As we discussed in our last episode, one of the limitations of institutional approaches is their disconnection from sustained grassroots organising.
Well, the PARRG directly addresses this through its own segment that we are going to be having on Connecting the Dots, our power building reparations pathway. This session will outline the strategic journey from these family or local community circles to international influence building, showing how systematically organised communities can exercise power locally, nationally, internationally, and power over institutions in terms of forcing them to be accountable to us rather than just using power to do things for themselves without us but are about us.
Okay, so can you walk our listeners through this pathway and how the PARRG fits into it?
So the pathway begins at the most basic level. This is what we can all do with the Maatzoedzaduaras, which build the knowledge power through the documentation and analysis of the Maangamizi. Why is this important? Because so much of the discussion on reparations focuses on reparations and include the denial of reparations is about, well, we didn't do it. You're okay now. The world's a much better place. It doesn't recognize that we are still impacted today. We are still affected by African chattel enslavement, colonization, and neo-colonization or neo-colonialism. And so when we have these Maatzoedzaduaras, they give us the grassroots data, the examples, the case studies, the testimonies that feed into the PARRGs, the Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings, which helps to solidify and build and harness our community power, by bringing together individuals and groups to develop collective strategies.
And then from PARRGs to larger structures?
Yes, the PARRGs inform the Pan-African People's Assemblies, or the People's Assemblies on African Reparations, which build political power by bringing together representatives from multiple communities, that is African heritage communities, to formulate demands and coordinate action. These assemblies then push for institutional mechanisms like the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice and the Ubuntu Gotla People's International Tribunal for Global Justice, which serve as formal power-sharing structures between communities and institutions.
So would it be audacious of me to assume that attending the Bristol PARRG isn't just about a single event, it's about plugging into an entire power-building ecosystem?
Yes, one that is about us, that is for us, that is led by us. And that is not us in the Stop the Maangamizi campaign or even the Maangamizi Educational Trust, its educational arm. I mean people of all African heritages, however they self-define today, whatever their own journey has been, their own experiences of the Maangamizi. It is about the people leading, and that is what we believe in, that is what we advocate for, that is people's rights under international law. And it's crucial that at each level of these pathways that community control and accountability mechanisms are centered. So unlike some of the institutional approaches that we've discussed in previous episodes, where communities are relegated to bystander or even spectator roles, and some cases community members may be picked out as advisors at best, this pathway that we are advocating now, beginning with the Maatzoedzaduaras, feeding into the Pan-African Reparations Rebellion Groundings, and then the People's Assemblies on African Reparations or Pan-African People's Assemblies upwards, ensures that power flows from the grassroots up, not from the institutions down.
Oh, this seems to address directly what you called in our last episode the disconnect between diplomatic efforts and grassroots movements.
It does. And crucially, it doesn't reject engagement with institutions or even states entirely. However, it changes the terms and nature of that engagement. Rather than communities seeking recognition from institutions or even states, the institutions and these states must respond and recognize and respect communities' organized power, or organized community power, I should say. The PARRG, that is the Pan-African Reparations Rebellion Groundings, helps community members understand how to build that power systematically. Remember that what we say, nothing about us without us on reparations, because anything about us without us is against us.
Okay, and the PARRG itself outlines a specific grounding element called finding your place in reparations movements building. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, this is a simple yet powerful sharing circle where community members respond to questions like, where do you see yourself connecting to this process right now? How can you and your family begin, practicing reparations as a liberation strategy? Not just give us back what you took from us or you stole from us, but liberation. That is focusing on the Maangamizi of today and how we end it. It recognizes that people enter this work and this struggle, this cause for repair or of repair at different points and with different capacities and insights and knowledges, and it helps them or supports them to identify concrete next steps.
That's robust, because it makes this work accessible to everyone, not just established activists.
Exactly. And it connects directly to what we've emphasized in our last episode of Yeresiesie and whole Preparation for Reparations podcast about the importance of accessible approaches to reparations work. Unlike exclusive conferences, the PARRG is designed to be accessible to community members regardless of their prior involvement or their resources.
Oh, well, it sounds to me that these PARRGs embody the principle that reparations work begins with us. Yeresiesie, rather than waiting for external validation and leadership.
That's precisely it. The entire PARRG is structured around the understanding that we must prepare ourselves through building organized community power, which literally starts with the self, with our family or those that we organize or are around us, and extends out into our communities. Developing our own knowledge frameworks and creating our own mechanisms for accountability and implementation.
Call to action. Attending the Bristol PARRG. Let's get practical for our listeners. The Bristol Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings take place on May the 17th. Why should people prioritize attending this event?
Well, the PARRG offers something fundamentally different from the typical conference or workshop. It's not just about listening to presentations, it's about active participation in shaping strategies, building connections, and developing concrete reparations action plans. Attending means becoming part of a growing people's movement that's building genuine participatory power to be able to effect and secure reparatory justice by our own people's power.
And what would you specifically say to listeners who may be new to these ideas around reparations organising or feel that they don't have enough knowledge to contribute?
I would emphasise that the PARRG is designed precisely to welcome and invite the participation of people at all levels of engagement. The format includes multiple entry points, from sharing personal experiences or family experiences to learning about established campaigns and organising strategies. What's most important isn't what you already know, but your own willingness to engage in collective power building. Your lived experience as a person of African heritage and ancestry is itself a form of knowledge that enriches our collective overstanding.
And what would you say to those that are actually involved in reparations or related organising?
For experienced organisers, I'd say the PARRG offers an opportunity to connect your own organising efforts to a broader strategic framework, a global strategic framework. Also, to be able to learn from successful initiatives like the passing of the Bristol Atonement and Reparations Motion, and strengthen connections with other organisers and community members, which is always a good thing. It's about moving from isolated campaigning or even our own organisations to coordinated action that builds people's power at multiple levels simultaneously. And the more we're able to do that is the more we will be able to literally flex our muscles and our strength in order to make the demands and enforce them with our own people's power building.
And what about the practical details now? Where exactly will it be held and how can people register?
The PARRG will take place in Bristol on Saturday the 17th of May at the Malcolm X Centre. It will start at 10 a.m. and will go to about 4 p.m. Now, for specific venue details and registration information, you can visit the Stop the Maangamizi campaign website, which is www.stopthemaangamizi.com. You can also email stopthemaangamizi@gmail.com, or you can contact the African Connections Consortium. They are active on Instagram and also Facebook. The event will run for about 6 hours, but we're really encouraging people to be there from the beginning, because it is about the relationships that we build and that we, the connections we make in the room, and people will really benefit from the whole process.
Okay, and is there anything that attendees should bring other than themselves in order to prepare for this event?
I would encourage those who are looking to come down to Bristol to familiarise themselves with the Stop the Maangamizi campaign's template letter to MPs, which can be found on the Stop the Maangamizi campaign website. And this will also be available on the day. It's also helpful to reflect on your own family and community experiences of the Maangamizi so that you come prepared to fully engage in some of the discussions. This will enrich the kind of facilitated discussions that we will be having on the day. But most importantly, please come with an open mind and a willingness to engage with others.
And for the listeners who cannot attend this specific PARRG, are there other ways they can engage with this work?
Absolutely. Whilst we would love to see as many people as possible at the Bristol PARRG, we understand that not everyone can attend. Listeners can still participate by starting Maatzoedzaduaras in your own settings, your own families, your own communities. You can go on the website of the Stop the Maangamizi campaign. You can download the template letter to lobby your MPs and elected officials if you're in the UK. You can use this as a template if you're international, if you're outside of the UK, that is. I'm sure there's still something in there that can be utilised in how you engage with elected officials who claim to be representing the people, but in many cases are not. But you can also, I think, gain inspiration on how you connect with other reparations initiatives. You can also organise your own Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion groundings or equivalents. And of course, members of the Stop the Maangamizi campaign will be willing to support and assist you with this. The Stop the Maangamizi campaign website provides resources for a lot of these activities. And in the Maangamizi Educational Trust, we also are here to link you and to provide educational resources that may be necessary and that you may find useful.
Now this connects to a key principle we've emphasized throughout this podcast, that preparation for reparations happens at multiple levels simultaneously.
Exactly. So whether you're documenting your family's own experiences, whether you're lobbying your local councillors or members of parliament, or you're participating in international advocacy, you are contributing to building the power needed for genuine reparatory justice. The PARRG, that is the Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings, helps us to coordinate these efforts taking place locally, nationally, internationally, globally for maximum impact. So as we get ready to close this episode, I want to emphasise how the upcoming PARRG in Bristol embodies everything that we've been advocating for throughout this podcast series. From grassroots power building through Maatzoedzaduaras that we detailed in episode 2, to the critiques of institutional approaches we discussed in our last episode. So we're not just critiquing, we're also showing an alternative path.
And it really brings our conversation full circle, doesn't it? In episode 2, you provided a comprehensive guide to setting up Maatzoedzaduaras as a foundational part of our reparations infrastructure. And now we're seeing how these circles connect to the broader movement building going on through the PARRG.
Yes, that's right. And this demonstrates what we mean by Yeresiesie yen ho. We are preparing ourselves for that reparations. As was emphasized in episode 2, in a world of accelerating change, our preparation determines whether we will be subjects or architects of the future. The Bristol PARRG is about becoming architects of our reparations futures rather than subjects of processes designed about us but without us, and therefore will be against us.
Yep, and for the listeners who found the practical guidance in episode 2 valuable, the PARRG offers an opportunity to implement those steps within a supportive community.
Yes, and that's why I hope that as many of our listeners as possible will join us in Bristol on the 17th of May, which is a Saturday, by the way. So whether you've already established a Maatzoedzaduaras or you're thinking about doing it following the guidance that we provided in episode 2, or you're just beginning to explore these approaches, the PARRG taking place in Bristol will provide concrete tools and connections and, dare I say, inspiration to strengthen your own reparations work.
Yeah, and for those of you that haven't yet listened to episode 2, it would be great preparation for attending the Pan-Afrikan Reparations Rebellion Groundings.
Absolutely. Episode 2 provides the theoretical foundation and practical guidance for Maatzoedzaduaras, while the PARRG offers a space to put these concepts into practice and connect with others doing similar work. Together, they represent our comprehensive approach to building grassroots power to effect and secure holistic reparatory justice.
And again, thanks to our listeners for joining us today. In our next episode, we'll be sharing insights and outcomes from the Bristol PARRG, continuing to document how community power is a reshaping tool in the global reparations landscape.
So, until then, stay engaged, stay committed, and remember that the work of repair begins with us. Nothing about us without us. This is Esther Xosei
And Simeon Stanford,
on behalf of the Maangamizi Educational Trust, reminding you that Yeresiesie, we are preparing ourselves, is part of the power building to effect and secure the holistic reparatory justice that our communities deserve. Thanks again to Brother Daniel Kofi, our technical assistant, for all of your support today.